Hello and good evening. Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiega, coming to you guys again live today on May the 8th to bring you guys another round of stories around the NFL, starting off with the Cleveland Browns and what their general manager said about Deshaun Watson and his expectations for this coming season, as well as later in the show talking about the Kansas City Chiefs wide receiver Xavier Worthy and what is the one thing everybody is concerned about with him and his career in the NFL. Stick around and listen to all these topics coming up on today's show. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. And without further ado, we will jump into that first segment, the idea of the expectations around the Cleveland Browns and their franchise quarterback, Deshaun Watson, or that is how he was painted out to be a few years ago when he was traded to the Cleveland Browns from the Houston Texans. I talked about it a few days ago, the compensation both of those teams got officially after all these years of figuring out the draft picks, who those draft picks ended up being. It finally concluded after this year's draft. And you look at what the Texans got. They got a boatload of talent and just potential starters on their team, from the offensive side of the ball to the defensive side of the ball, talking about Tank Dell, C.J. Stroud. They brought in Stephon Diggs. They drafted Will Anderson with one of those picks, Christian Harris as well. They were able to make all of these deals happen because, essentially, of this trade. And you look on the flip side as to what the Cleveland Browns got as of now. At the time of making this trade, Deshaun Watson, and getting that massive deal that the Browns gave him as well, I think it was a bit more of a 50-50, 60-40 sort of trade, depending on which side you favored, and just seeing which side of the equation, the Texans or the Browns, got the better end of the deal. Back then, I think it was a bit closer. Now, before the start of this year, I think you could start leaning towards more the Houston Texans because you've already seen what this has turned out to be. And I talked about in that previous episode the expectations now on Deshaun Watson heading into this year. After 2 full years of being with the Cleveland Browns, he's only managed to play 12 games because during the first season he was serving that suspension. And then this past year, he played a good amount of games, but then he hurt his shoulder and had to have season-ending shoulder surgery because of that. And in his time period being here, in those 12 games, he's only managed to throw for 2,217 yards, 14 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions. If you compare that with the 2 years he's been here, you look at it and you say, all right, well, he's been unlucky with injury. He's had to adjust to the team much later than anticipated because of his suspension. But again, you look at that, and that seems like a valid point. I would agree with you there, but you bring in Joe Flacco this season. I know the expectations around Joe Flacco and Deshaun Watson aren't the same because, one, Deshaun Watson is older. He has a lot more legacy to establish in this league after the suspension and the trade and everything like that. Joe Flacco came in, not really much to prove or to try and just play out in his time with the Cleveland Browns. So he comes in, throws 13 touchdowns, no real pressure on him. He's just going out there and playing, has 1,600 yards, And it just seems easy for Joe Flacco, comparing him to Deshaun Watson, who you paid all this money. There is a bit of a caveat in there with what I just mentioned, the different scenarios each of them are coming from, but it is interesting to look at because of how really seamless it was for Joe Flacco to come in here, while Deshaun Watson has continued to struggle in a good amount of these games. But with that all being said, Deshaun Watson remains the unquestioned starter for the Cleveland Browns. The front office, the general manager, even the head coach have all vented their confidence in Deshaun Watson, have really backed him up until this point. Specifically, their general manager, Andrew Berry, said last week that, this time period of adjusting, not seeing an ideal situation with Deshaun Watson, he went out and said that they expected this transition period and it's not something uncommon that happens in the NFL. More specifically, he said, "We feel good about Deshaun Watson. We like the trajectory we have seen and do think he will have a big year." Last year, he was hindered by that shoulder surgery, like I mentioned, and up until now, he still has been rehabbing. The volunteer workouts have been going on for the last 2 to 3 weeks, I want to say, and we haven't seen Deshaun Watson out there really. He's still rehabbing on that. But even with those doubts and how the rehab hopefully goes as planned, Andrew Berry also continued on to say, "We feel very good about the transition. He is in a good spot mentally and physically. We do expect to hit the ground running on that side of the ball, and I know he is very excited about returning to the playing field and getting over this injury. We do have high expectations for him and the offense this season." Again, reestablishing the, I don't want to say pressure, but just the attention to that side of the ball. He said he expects to see the offense hit the ground running, and that, up until now, the last 2 years, hasn't been the case with Deshaun. It's been a lot slower transition to get the ball moving. Of course, it helps that you have Nick Chubb, and it is a lot easier for the running game to get going, in my opinion, than the passing game and getting the timing down and everything like that, especially when you bring in Jerry Jeudy and trying to integrate him into the offense. It can get a little bit dicey and a little bit confusing at times, but, Andrew Berry, the Cleveland Browns, feel like now in year 3, they expect to get out of the gates firing, come out with a lot more intensity is what I'm picking out from the statements that Andrew Berry made. A lot of high expectations for Deshaun Watson. They were able to reach the playoffs this past season without him, so they have a talented roster. That defense is one of the top defenses in the NFL. On the offensive side of the ball, you didn't have Nick Chubb for the majority of this season because of that injury he sustained against the Pittsburgh Steelers. But when he comes back, I expect him to be Nick Chubb and help this offense as much as he can. So you have a good running game. Their offensive line is solid. You bring in Jerry Jeudy as well to complement Amari Cooper. I thought David Njoku had a mini breakout season last year, becoming one of Joe Flacco's most reliable targets. I think he'll continue that on. Plus a talented defense. It's a great opportunity for Deshaun now to forget about the suspension, the shoulder surgery, and now really almost you peel away all these excuses that you could bring up for Deshaun being here 2 years already. Like, if you haven't gotten used to it by now, when will you? Because of that contract extension, that is one of the biggest points about this whole situation and these expectations. I think these comments aren't just coming out of the blue. I think these are calculated a little bit because of that massive contract that Deshaun got. It is coming to a point where he will be 28 years old, really entering those prosperous years of a quarterback in this sought-out timeline, usually for franchise quarterbacks. It is coming to the point where now you have to at least live up to that contract a little bit. The Cleveland Browns have to see a tad bit more, a glimpse of the potential that they saw in Houston in the third year. They gave you 1 year for the suspension. Last year, unlucky, you got injured. Now, you're probably going to start training camp healthy. You're going to go through everything that every other NFL player goes through. So there's really no excuses, and I think these comments aren't really, like I said before, aren't just coming out of the blue and that they are confident in, but they are adding a bit more emphasis on it this year now that they want to see something, they expect to see something. It's not like they don't feel like Deshaun is capable of doing. They have all the confidence in the world, but with the contract that he got, you have to start thinking about renegotiating it, restructuring it in a way to help you continue to build this roster up, because every year somebody leaves, somebody comes in, somebody gets hurt. No team stays the same that long, honestly, in the NFL. And with so much money being allocated to Deshaun Watson, depending on how this season goes, if it all goes great, how they restructure it, maybe to start thinking about an extension way down the line if he plays great and they're convinced from his level of play, or on the flip side, if it goes bad, how this confidence and how the Cleveland Browns start to talk about him, I think will be interesting to see how it develops. Right now, everything's all dandy and all happy. Everyone's confident in him. But if they continue to struggle, keep an eye on how Kevin Stefanski, Andrew Berry, and these guys talk or answer questions about Deshaun, and see how that confidence level kind of wavers in and out if he doesn't live up to these expectations. Right now, everyone's confident in him. I think he could have a bounce-back season. He has the roster to do it. I don't see why he wouldn't be able to. But, again, once you step on that field, once you're out there, it's a whole different ball game. And I think for Deshaun to do that, he has the capabilities of doing it, but he just has to go out there and prove it once and for all in this massive third year leading in with the Cleveland Browns. But that is that topic. That is a few months away. But in the meantime, we will move on with today's episode. A lot more to cover on today's show. Is Mike Tomlin on the hot seat officially heading into this season? We'll get into that and what one of his former players said on this topic, as well as covering Joe Burrow and his injury update coming back from that wrist injury. He returned to practice this week. I'll give you guys a bit of what he said to the media, as well as what this could mean for the Cincinnati Bengals going forward. All that coming up on today's episode. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Back here now on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. I mentioned talking about Mike Tomlin and being on the hot seat as the next segment. Before I do that, I want to remind you guys, if you have any questions or comments you want to make during today's live show, to use the tip and donations link you see on your screen, gsmcpodcast.net. By using that link, I can see your questions pop up on my screen, and that way I can read them out on air and get your guys' perspective on anything I have to say or the topic on hand. It's a massive help for the show as well as all the other shows across the network. So again, if you guys would, use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net, with any of your questions or comments. And in saying that, we can go on to the second topic. Mike Tomlin, is he officially on the hot seat? Is that fair to say in 2024? Coming off of last year, he lost in the playoffs to the Bills, or I shouldn't say he lost, the Steelers lost to the Buffalo Bills in the playoffs. Heading into it, I'm sure many people thought there was a clear discrepancy there. The Bills, as up and down as they were, I think the talent level really decided that game on how well Josh Allen played and just how there were a lot of mistakes made by the Pittsburgh Steelers. A lot of people felt that they shouldn't be there, but they managed to get there. They managed to will themselves to the playoffs and have that game, but not move on. It has now been a good amount of years since Mike Tomlin, I think it was since 2016, that the Pittsburgh Steelers have not won a playoff game. And now it has been a running theme. I won't say it's just coming out of nowhere right now, but it is starting to become a louder topic in the media and around NFL circles about Mike Tomlin and how much longer will he stay as the Pittsburgh Steelers head coach. Everybody mentions the zero losing seasons. It's been 17 years, 17 seasons without a losing record. But with that being such a, I don't know what the exact term I want to use here for that record, for that trend for Mike Tomlin. But after a while, after not having losing seasons for however many years, people start to get bored of it, I guess is a good way of saying it. They want to see more because of the history and the legacy that the Pittsburgh Steelers carry. It starts to become old and people want and expect more, and I tend to agree with them from that standpoint. I think now, it comes to a point where you're thinking, all right, like, this team is way too talented to not be moving on past the first round. And this year they asked Mike Tomlin about it in a press conference. He stormed out of it. He seemed pretty annoyed by the question, but soon after that he announced that he would be coming back and playing again, or not playing and coaching again, I should say, this year for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But like I mentioned, it has started to become a bit more loud with this conversation, especially with one analyst going on their platform. Willie Colon is his name, a former offensive lineman who actually played for Mike Tomlin as a Pittsburgh Steeler a few years ago. He went on and had some pretty upfront comments to make about Mike Tomlin and being on the so-and-so hot seat. He said, "I love Mike Tomlin, but I have to officially say, he's on the hot seat. And when you talk about his overall record, you talk about in 17 seasons, he has an 8-10 playoff record. Only 4 seasons without playoff wins, and he's had some bona fide teams, even with Ben Roethlisberger. The issue with Mike Tomlin right now is he wins games he's supposed to win, but loses games he shouldn't lose." He also went on to mention this idea of people looking at the Steelers as the bullies or dweebs, as he put it, said that losing to the Arizona Cardinals and the New England Patriots makes you and paints you out as being dweebs, as getting punked, to use as another term to describe it. And my thoughts on this topic, on Mike Tomlin being on the hot seat, and just what Willie Colon said, that last part about the bullies and being looked at as dweebs and just getting punked, I think that's valid. I think that's a good argument to make, and I think that's fair to say because of the talent level on the Steelers roster, the kind of coach that Mike Tomlin is. Everybody always says, if there's a coach out there, you always hear it, if there's a coach that players want to play for, it's Mike Tomlin. Everybody wants to play for the Steelers. That's what they say coming in when they're signed or just talking about it as a free agent. People want to play for the Steelers, and this idea of having so much talent, being hyped up a lot around the league, but at the end of the day, if you're losing to teams like, with all due respect, like the Cardinals or the Patriots, who aren't touted as one of the top teams, people are left confused. And especially, I'll go back to that Arizona game at home. It was just one of the worst games, if you're a Steelers fan, which I am, to watch and see how the Arizona Cardinals had their way with the Steelers. The Steelers couldn't do anything about it, and it just doesn't make sense with how the Steelers have talked about this team, all the talent that they have. To get punked like that at home, it doesn't leave and it doesn't paint the Steelers in a good picture. And people, a lot of the time, usher that to Mike Tomlin. He is the leader of this team. He's always sticking up for this team. And looking at Mike Tomlin now, so many seasons of the same thing going on, I still think it really doesn't all fall on him. To say that he's on the hot seat now, I think it just falls in line with the saying, the grass isn't always greener on the other side. You have a good thing going with Mike Tomlin. the consistency that he brings, the Steelers way of doing things, the Steelers mantra. You always catch Mike Tomlin saying things like, the standard is the standard. He understands that. He's the one that sort of carries it on. He's been here for that whole run of the prosperous years for the Pittsburgh Steelers. To think that you're just going to get rid of him, and the fans want instant results, right? People want this situation to change as soon as possible. To get rid of the one consistent piece that has been there all these years doesn't make much sense. I can see the argument about, trying to change things and bring in a new voice or something like that, but especially with the head coaching position, it's not something that can easily just come in and out and you're going to have the same results. A lot of the time, the team has a transition period, and then once that transition period is over, you get the younger guys that sort of step into their shell and sort of take over the team, but your older, more reliable, established players might be on the way out. And again, you're stuck in this balance, this cycle of bringing in players that you think would fit, trying to reestablish yourself on the defensive side of the ball or on the offensive side of the ball, how it has been the case thus far for the Steelers. You have too many pieces going in and out to not have a leader that has a clear picture of what this is all supposed to look like. I think that's one of the biggest attributes for Mike Tomlin, that he knows what success is. He knows what's worked for this team in the past. It's just harder than a lot of people think to build a great team and have all the pieces fall in line when you don't have a quarterback. They addressed that to some extent this offseason, really just getting rid of everybody in that room, bringing in Russell Wilson, bringing in Justin Fields, as well as addressing the biggest question over the last 4 to 3 years, the offensive line, drafting 2 in the first 2 rounds, also going out and bringing in other wide receivers, changing the personnel, bringing in Arthur Smith as the offensive coordinator to start something new with the Steelers, bringing in a new wide receiver coach. They changed general managers just a couple seasons ago. This is all part of that transition. It's never pretty. People want to see instant results, but this process takes time. If you don't have one of the top 5 to 4 quarterbacks in the NFL that mask a lot of the deficiencies that these teams have, the Steelers are trying to find that guy. Maybe they find something in Russell Wilson or Justin Fields, but if not, that is just an ongoing problem. A lot of the issues that people see with the Steelers, I think, just comes from being young, inexperienced on the offensive side of the ball. And this is really the first offseason where I've seen the Steelers, and credit to their general manager, Omar Khan, on establishing the issues that they have and going out and addressing them, going out and getting the offensive lineman that you need, really buying into that punch you in the face, run first, run heavy team that they want to build with Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. Finding guys that fit that mold is now starting to become an actual legitimate case for this team, because they're actually going out and getting guys like Zach Frazier, Troy Fautanu, and other just pieces along the offense to try and establish this. How the expectations shift now, if these pieces all fall in line, that's yet to be seen, but I think they're moving in the right direction, where in the past, under different management, I think the Steelers would have just been content with what they have, and maybe they would have kept Kenny Pickett around to move him on, knowing you spent a first-round draft pick on him. I think took a lot of courage and a lot of guts to do that, but it is coming to that point. Everybody in the Steelers building knows that they haven't won a playoff game since 2016, but I don't think anyone in there is putting the blame on Mike Tomlin. To have him on the hot seat, I think it's pretty ridiculous, because he is in that conversation with the Andy Reids, the John Harbaughs, I'm blanking. I don't know. I guess you could throw Kyle Shanahan in there now. All these established head coaches where things don't go wrong, you just don't go and get rid of them. I know they've had more success than the Steelers these past few years, but at the same time, these are established coaches that you just don't move on and think you're going to get something better by changing one of these guys. It just doesn't happen like that. It's not reality to think like that. People think that just trying to find the solutions after they've tried everything seems easier than it actually is, but if people want to see the old Steelers and want to get rid of the guy that, has been there that whole time, that's really the biggest point. And the biggest thing I can say about this whole situation with Mike Tomlin, he's been here through the ups and downs, through some of the prosperous years, at least in recent memory with the Steelers. He knows what he's doing. I would have confidence in Mike Tomlin. I think this year we will see something different from the Steelers with the kind of people that they're bringing into their building. And, if this just collapses, I don't think it would be a major collapse where they win just 4 or 5 games. They have a tough schedule, but again, it's unlike the Steelers to, in the last 17 years, have a losing record. I don't think this year will be the first. We're just going to have that confidence in Mike Tomlin. He's one of the most established guys. A lot of people would back him, and if they got rid of him, I don't think it wouldn't be a good decision if they got rid of Mike Tomlin and then in the same offseason he finds another job, because I can guarantee if he does become available, at least half of the NFL would go after him to try and be their head coach, and that won't make the Steelers look any better. So it is in their best interest to keep him. I have high hopes for the Steelers this year with all the pieces that they've brought in. It just has to finally come into fruition in 2024. But in the meantime, we will continue on with today's episode. A few more topics to talk about on today's episode. Coming up is the injury update on Joe Burrow's wrist, how he's feeling, how he's looking on his return to practice, and later on, the comments made recently by Austin Rivers on NBA players and NFL players. What did he say, and what I have to say about his comments are coming up on today's show. So stick around after this break. We'll be back with more on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Moving right along with today's show, and on the next topic, staying in the AFC North, moving on now to Joe Burrow and an update on his injured wrist. Of course, last season he injured it halfway through the NFL season in Week 11. It did require him to have season-ending wrist surgery in that Week 11 game, so he was put on the shelf, and the Bengals, I want to say, went on to finish with a 9-8 record, pretty pedestrian record, not too much really to look into. After Joe Burrow went down, that's a real morale killer to think you're making the playoffs after that. This last season was kind of thrown in the bin for the Cincinnati Bengals. And you look at Joe Burrow, that being his most recent injury, of course, when he came into the league, the ACL injury and that knee that also was season-ending. And it has been a pretty bumpy road in terms of injuries for Joe Burrow. I gave an update about a month ago, I want to say, about how his rehab was going. Now, this past Monday, the Bengals social media posted a video of Joe Burrow walking out to their practice field with his cleats, getting back into the flow of things, being out there with the guys, throwing in some drills. He ramped it up a little bit more on this past Tuesday, also with the Bengals social media posting some more videos, some more pictures of him. And the general idea coming from the Cincinnati Bengals is that he is on the appropriate recovery time. He should be ready to go probably at the start of training camp if he continues on this pace. And Burrow had a chance to talk to the media after practice, seeing him out there for the first time, about how everything is going, how he's feeling up until this point, to which he said, I'm in a good spot right now. I'm really strong, bigger than I was. We're going to continue to eat right, lift, and go through my routine and see where I'm at. Then he also revealed that he's been throwing for about a month now, and it's been all pretty positive for him, and it all has sort of worked out for him where he hasn't really had to change much about his off-season routine. Usually players like to take some time off. It all sort of lined up where he got injured at the, I guess, right time, looking at this long term, to have that rest and then start to come back around the same time when he would usually come back during his offseason program. Now, with that all lining up, he is expected to return at full during training camp. And I thought it was interesting that he made a point of emphasis that he really tried to get bigger over this offseason, over this time away from football, to get stronger, lift a little heavier, and just overall get a bigger frame to him. I thought that was interesting just because I never really thought of Joe Burrow as a smaller quarterback. You know, when you think smaller, more fragile, I guess, for a lack of a better term, of these quarterbacks, you're thinking of smaller guys like Kyler maybe, Bryce Young a little bit. These guys that have smaller frames and that rely on their escapability trait to try and create plays, get people open, find those pockets of space where they could throw out of. I never really thought or saw Joe Burrow as that, but it does make sense looking at the injuries he's had, how maybe putting on a bit more muscle makes you a bit durable. I like that thinking from him. Just in those pictures that I've seen from the Bengals social media, he does look a bit more filled out in his frame, and I think it'll work out best for him. They've addressed the offensive line as well to try and prevent these injuries, but Joe Burrow seems to be doing as much as he can on his side of the ball from his end to try and really limit these injuries because of how important he really is to this Bengals team. I don't think there's more to say other than the fact that there's always this stat that people throw out that I saw again on the internet, that when Joe Burrow plays at least 16 regular season games, the Cincinnati Bengals have made at least the AFC championship game when Joe Burrow is really healthy throughout the whole season. That just has to be an incentive for the Cincinnati Bengals to keep Joe Burrow upright. The wrist injury was a pretty freak accident. If you go back and look at it, you know, he made a throw and then nobody really hit him. He didn't really hit himself on anybody's helmet or anything like that on the follow-through. It just sort of tore or just clicked once he made the throw, and he was in pretty agonizing pain on the sideline and then there afterwards. It was very odd to see, but it did end up being pretty severe to cost him the rest of the season. And this is huge now for the Bengals to have him coming back on this, trying to get him accumulated back to this team that is going to look a little bit different. You know, we've talked about in the past Zach Moss coming in to replace Joe Mixon. T. Higgins, where does he stand on his contract? You look at Trey Hendrickson as well. What's going on with him and what are they going to do about his contract? If this really is the last run of it for the Cincinnati Bengals, you have to give yourself the best shot at doing that. And to do so, you have to protect your franchise quarterback. He's doing everything that he's supposed to on his end. The Bengals have brought in more on that offensive line and trying to get everything in line. If this does end up being this last all-in season for the Cincinnati Bengals, you have to give yourself the best shot. I think they're doing it, and fortunately for them, Joe Burrow is coming back earlier and healthier now in this offseason, and the O-line should be better, like I mentioned. How they all sort of figure into this season and how they all gel together with the differences. Tyler Boyd's not coming back after signing with the Tennessee Titans. After they get everybody on the same page, how does that all fit into this journey that they're going to go into? That's something to keep in mind. And also, around the AFC North, I just finished talking about the Steelers and Mike Tomlin and some of the questions that they have. You look around with the Baltimore Ravens. Are they going to find another wide receiver for Lamar Jackson? Are they going to address some of the departures that happened on their offensive line, on the defensive side of the ball as well? How do they address those gaps in their roster and are they able to repeat what they did last year? A pretty close to flawless season that the Ravens had last year. They have one of the tougher schedules. There's a lot of uncertainties there as well. How does that affect the Bengals and trying to win this division, as well as the Cleveland Browns? Also talking about Deshaun Watson and how he fits in. If he's not going, this Cleveland Browns team isn't going to go much further than they did last year. There's a lot of uncertainties, and it is a great opportunity for the Bengals to sort of take advantage of this. They have pretty much everybody coming back relatively. T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow, if he's healthy. You just have to figure out and get everybody on the same page. The quicker they do that, the more I think they can take advantage of the difficulty that the Steelers, the Browns, and the Bengals have, not only with also trying to get everybody on the same page, but I think, ironically enough, the Browns, the Steelers, and the Browns, the Steelers, and the Ravens have the three most difficult schedules this coming season, and the Bengals, if I remember correctly, have the 16th or like the 18th hardest schedule in the NFL. So there is a window there for the Bengals to have everybody back and compete not only in their division, but to take advantage of a easier schedule per se and go out there and win some games and get back into the playoffs after missing them last year. If they're able to keep Joe Burrow healthy, Joe Burrow is the only quarterback to have beaten Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs other than Tom Brady in recent memory. So you have history and you have the talent on your side to kind of have a rebound season from last year. It all is sort of falling in line now for the Cincinnati Bengals. It is a good sign to see Joe Burrow back out there with his wrist. You just hope that they can keep him healthy. And with that, this division continues to be one of the more exciting ones to look forward to during the NFL season. Seeing that if everybody stays healthy, how these games are going to be some of the best. The AFC North is and has been one of the most competitive from top to bottom, always being close in record. All of them almost made the playoffs last year. The Bengals were right there on the cusp, and that always just seems to be the case with these teams. Joe Burrow coming back, it does make it a good chance that all four of these teams could be in the playoffs. I don't think that's crazy to say with how improved the Steelers have looked. The Ravens are as good as they are. The Browns also coming off of a playoff berth last season. The AFC is tough. It's going to be interesting how the Bengals play in it and how they fall in line in it as well. But Joe Burrow is certainly going to be the catalyst to any sort of success that they have in 2024. But in saying that, we will move on with the show. And we're going to go into a quick break right now. And on the other side of that, I mentioned talking about Xavier Worthy was picked in the first round of the NFL draft by the Kansas City Chiefs. Everything seemed to be perfect, but there is one thing that everybody continues to go back on with Worthy and what could potentially hold him back in the NFL. And we are going to get to those comments that Austin River made on live television on the Pat McAfee show a few days ago on NBA players and NFL players. So stick around to find out what he said and my thoughts on it right after this break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Moving right along with the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Now, staying in the AFC, but moving over to Kansas City and talking about their first round draft pick, Xavier Worthy. I was a big fan, but also not a fan of the Chiefs getting the most ideal and perfect wide receiver to fit into their system. I knew this was going to happen as soon as he ran that 40. The Chiefs were going to be all over this. it wasn't enough to get him into the top half of the draft because people had questions elsewhere. But I knew once he broke the record and set the record at the Combine that this was going to be a match made in heaven. The Chiefs ended up trading up 4 spots with the Buffalo Bills to select Worthy with the 28th overall pick. And right away, the Tyreek Hill comparisons came in. The 4.21 speed at the Combine just jumps off the board for the Chiefs and anybody that was aware of it. And people compared him to Tyreek Hill. The speed is obviously there, but Coach Andy Reid instead said that Xavier Worthy had more of a body type, a little bit more like a Deshaun Jackson, going back to his time with the Eagles and how successful Deshaun Jackson was during those times there with the Eagles and Coach Andy Reid being there. I can see it, how people view this addition of Xavier Worthy and who they want to compare him to. It's neither here nor there. He's fast. He is a game changer. He has that one thing that defenses and opposing teams just can't plan for. You can't teach speed, pure, natural 4.21 speed like that. It is the one thing everybody fears, and he has it. Adding it to the best quarterback of this generation, it is going to be something to watch. But one thing people will right away jump out at about Xavier Worthy is his weight, his frame, how he looks. You look at Tyreek Hill, that's a comparison I made just instantly, how most people made. Tyreek Hill is smaller in stature and height, but looking at him, he is a pretty built-out dude for his size. I don't know how much he weighs exactly, but I know he weighs more than the 169 pounds that Xavier Worthy weighs, and people have drawn their attention to that a lot. 169 pounds. I don't think I've been that since maybe my first year or two in high school. I'm no professional athlete, but 169 pounds. You look at other receivers in the league that are maybe a little bit smaller, but they aren't that light, and people will draw their questions to that, how he'll take hits, how he'll deal with injuries potentially down the line. But it is something that Worthy has really embraced, that comparison with Deshaun Jackson. And I mentioned that because also, ironically enough, Deshaun Jackson also came in around that same weight. And Xavier Worthy doesn't seem too bothered about it. That whole weight thing has been put into question, how watching Deshaun Jackson has actually helped Xavier Worthy kind of embrace these concerns, not really pay too much attention to them. They asked him about these weight concerns during rookie minicamp this past weekend for the Kansas City Chiefs, and Xavier Worthy pretty much said, "I don't think I took big hits. I delivered them. I feel like it's not going to be a problem. I feel like just understanding your strengths and weaknesses, I feel like that's the big thing in the league. Like I said, D-Jack came in the league at 169 pounds and understood his strengths. That was according to Jordan Foote of Sports Illustrated. Basically, Xavier Worthy not paying too much attention to it. And the biggest thing I took away from that quote that I had written down from Xavier Worthy is that idea of strength and weaknesses, and how really just playing into those can help you avoid these injuries, these sort of problems that follow along with lighter guys in the NFL, lower weight guys in the NFL. I thought it was great that he brought it up, because I thought that is one of the biggest reasons why this match made so much sense to me with the Chiefs and how they play on their offense and how unpredictable, unscripted, and just how free-flowing it is, how unexpected it is for opposing defenses. To play to Xavier Worthy's strengths, you're not going to have him out there run blocking on his own and trying to set the edge. That makes no sense for Xavier Worthy. You're not going to try and put 20 pounds on him either. To play to his strengths, I think he fits in right away, because there's a lot of pre-snap motion on this Kansas City Chiefs offense. There's a lot of just fugazi, that's a word I'll throw out there, fugazi with this Chiefs team, that you might see one thing, you might see a similar formation, but it could be a completely different play with how skillful Patrick Mahomes is. You look at Travis Kelce as well there to draw some attention to him there. How the whole Rashee Rice situation all plays out. If he plays a good amount of games this year, that's another weapon you have to look out for. Marquise Brown as well. All the speed and just motion they could have with all of these guys, it makes it a lot difficult for teams to try and defend. Now the other teams have to try and adjust to the Chiefs rather than the Chiefs adjusting to what the defense is putting out there. That is one of the biggest reasons why they look so dominant and why it just looks effortless for them to go out there and score, because constantly they're making the defense play to their strengths and not to their weaknesses. And Coach Andy Reid is one of the best at doing that, disguising things, just making this offense play into their strengths. I think he'll have no problem fitting in Xavier Worthy into that mold and sort of building out this offense to get the best out of Worthy. How exactly that pans out, I'm not sure, but he was successful with doing it with Deshaun Jackson. Those Eagles teams were talented, but I think it's fair to say they didn't have a Patrick Mahomes or a Travis Kelce on their team. So with better weapons, better talent around Andy Reid, and having a similar guy to Deshaun Jackson, I don't see why he can't play into it a lot more like that. And with the Chiefs, they've only gotten better. Last season, they went out and won the Super Bowl. How you could think that they can't at least go back there, barring any major injuries to any major players. I mentioned the Rashee Rice situation. That is something to look out for as well, but this team has only gotten better. And on that topic of getting better and just embracing Xavier Worthy's strengths rather than his weaknesses, at rookie minicamp, Patrick Mahomes also reached out to him. Apparently, Xavier Worthy said last weekend that how Patrick Mahomes reached out to him, and he said that I talked to him, I connected with him a little bit. He was excited about me coming into camp. It's amazing just being able to have that quarterback that wants you. That means they're obviously going to try and find a way to get you the ball and make you a part of the offense. Just more ammo filling into this point I'm trying to make about Patrick Mahomes sees what he can do in this offense. Trying to fit him in won't be any problem. If Patrick Mahomes is already reaching out to him, it's not like they don't see how he can fit in. Patrick Mahomes is excited to have him on. Andy Reid, I won't doubt Andy Reid on anything offensive-wise. So how this all fits in, it seems like everybody's excited about it. I'm excited to see how this all plays out with Xavier Worthy and that speed. Seeing it on Sundays is going to be a lot different than seeing it at the Combine or in practice. Chiefs fans should be excited. They are on the verge. Well, I won't say on the verge, but they are closer than a lot of teams have been to making history, trying to go back to back to back in Super Bowls. They're on the right path to it, but a lot more of this story has to be unfolded here with the rest of the offseason and heading into the NFL season. We'll wait on that story and put a pin on it, but we will go into the last break of the show now. And on the other side, we will address finally what Austin Rivers said about bringing some NBA players over to the NFL and how that is more likely and more beneficial than 30 NFL players going over and having success in the NBA. It caused a lot of attention and just conversation on social media with NFL players and NBA players chiming in. I'll tell you exactly what he said on that on the Pat McAfee show and what I think about the whole debate and where I fall on either side of it. Stick around. We'll be right back after this break. back here now on the show to wrap it up with this last segment. But before I do that, I want to remind you guys for one last time on the show, if you have any questions or comments you want to make during this live segment, to use the tip and donations link you see on your screen, gsmcpodcast.net. By using that link, your question will be brought up to me on my screen. I can read it out loud and just get your guys' perspective and your feel on anything that I say during the show. It's a massive help for not only this show, but all the other shows across the network. So if you would use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net, we would greatly appreciate it, and we'd greatly thank you for using that with any of your questions or comments. But like I mentioned, Austin Rivers, what did he say a few days ago that caused all this duress and just chaos really on social media around this topic that he brought up on the Pat McAfee show on Tuesday? He went on there to talk and have a conversation with Pat and the boys, and throughout that conversation he brought up something, his point of view on a topic that, like I mentioned before, caused a lot of discussion and debate on social media. What he said exactly is, I can take 30 players right now in the NBA and throw them in the NFL. You cannot take 30 NFL players and put them in the NBA. At the time of reading this, I saw Randy Moss responded to it. J.J. Watt responded to it. I saw Andrew Hawkins, Tyrann Mathieu respond to it, all, as you could probably imagine, falling in line with not agreeing with this, falling in line with the NFL side of it, and just like J.J. Watt went at Austin Rivers. I don't remember exactly what he said, but it was pretty brutal, what he said on social media. And it is an interesting question. It is an interesting proposition to think about. The way I thought of it and how I would interpret this, he didn't really go into too many specifics. He just said 30 players in the NBA right now, throwing them in the NFL. He felt that they could do more in that than taking 30 NFL players and placing them in the NBA. And how I would analyze this debate, that question is, which group can make more of an impact in a game right now if you were to throw them in there? That's how I sort of saw this question, and that's how I really came to the conclusion that I didn't agree with what Austin Rivers said. I agreed more on the NFL side of things, that I actually think if you took 30 NFL players, that they would have more success in the NBA than if you took the 30 NBA players and have them play in the NFL. Now, with context, with some background to all of this, if you're talking a whole season, there's no chance any NBA player can make that transition and go through training camp and playing all those games. There's all this talk about load management and missing a bunch of games in the NBA already. The amount of contact in the NBA and what they have to endure throughout those whole games that they play throughout a whole season, I don't think really comes close to what NFL players do in 17 to 18 weeks in an entire NFL season, with how, just like I mentioned, NBA players missing already the amount of time that they do throughout injury. Imagine them trying to withstand what they do in a whole NFL season with training camp and the offseason included. I think that a lot of them would struggle with that. And also, on the other side of things, how I see it, NFL players being more capable of making the switch. And if you're talking about one game, I still think NFL players are more impactful in that game, in one NBA game, than NBA players would be in one NFL game. The issue with getting hit, knowing the timing, the plays, and the concepts, and also a lot of NFL players where NBA players would fit in on an NFL team. I'm not throwing NBA players to be offensive linemen, to be defensive linemen, to be linebackers. I'm thinking skill positions to keep it relatively fair. And even so, if you threw NBA players in these skill positions at wide receiver, at tight end, at running back, a lot of the times, if you're not a running back or the quarterback, you're not touching the ball at all, and you're not making an impact just based on the nature of the game. You add that onto them trying to learn the plays and everything like that, the signals, the timing of it all, understanding zones and stuff like that. There's a lot more things that you have to go through if you're an NBA player to try and make an impact in one game, just based on the nature of the game and how dependent it is. On the NFL side of things, I don't think it would go well for NBA players, and I think that's really where it comes down to. The NFL is just more of a dependent sort of sport where, one, on the offensive side of the ball, if your offensive line isn't great, isn't one of the top offensive lines, you're not going to have success with your quarterback, your running back, your wide receivers if you have no time to do anything. So that's one thing. And then you move to the next level. If your quarterback has an offensive line that's great, but he himself isn't like a great player, isn't a consistent and excellent type of player, the receivers aren't going to get the ball. They're not going to have great games. The running back might, but the receivers are very dependent on the quarterback. It's very much the ultimate team sport, like a lot of people say. Because of that, making the transition from an NBA game to the NFL and how independent the sport is on the NBA side, making that transition and now depending on everybody to do their job to have success, I don't think it would go well for NBA players. And again, like I said, getting hit, knowing the timing and everything like that, it's too dependent to just try and have success in one game. Whereas if you look at, on the other side, the side that I agree with, NFL players having more success in one NBA game, there's more ways, I believe, in an NBA game to make an impact through rebounds, setting screens, scoring, the whole idea about getting fouled and how easily fouls are called now. Any player, any pro-level athlete, NFL, NBA players could probably play in an NBA game, and if they really tried and go out there and try to get fouled, they could probably at least get 10 to 12 points if they show some sort of ability to try and score the ball, plus trying to get fouled. They can easily probably score 8 to 12 points in an NBA game, plus all the other variables that I mentioned. Defending, that's also a big part of it in one NBA game. I think NFL players wouldn't really struggle too much with that if they're just picking up one-on-one, man-on-man defense. Also, like I mentioned, on the flip side of the NFL, the NBA is more of an independent sport. You don't need all 5 guys to do something in order for you to get a first down, gain 5 yards, gain 10 yards to help establish yourself on a drive. In an NBA game, if you have a guy scoring 40 plus and the rest of the guys aren't turning it over, aren't messing up the timing of the screen or anything like that, and they're scoring maybe 7 to 8 points, 9 points a game, you have a pretty decent chance of being efficient, being okay as an NBA team if you have one guy carrying the load over and over again at a consistent level. No shots here. I'm not trying to throw shots here at anybody, but if you look at the Knicks, by some comparison, Jalen Brunson goes out there and scores about 40 plus a game in the playoffs, and they have one other guy scoring close to 20, and the rest of the guys are playing great defense, rebounding, offensive rebounds, setting great screens, playing defense. They're doing all right for themselves right now, and they don't need 2 to 3 guys, 5 guys on the offensive line doing their job. I think that plays a big part in it, and why I see NFL players making that transition easier into the NBA game. That's just how I feel about it. I think just on the nature of the game, how it all plays out, I think you just can't help some things for NFL players and NBA players, both great groups of athletes. It'll be easier for them rather than the regular guy off of the street to try and make that transition, obviously. But just based on the nature of the game, the great athletes like Anthony Edwards, LeBron James, on the NFL side, you see guys like Myles Garrett going out there and playing basketball, C.J. Stroud, Devontae Adams. All these guys funny enough, played basketball and football throughout high school, some into college. If you look at a guy like Drake London, all these guys are very similar in athleticism, so you can see the comparison and why these conversations come up. But the way it's laid out, I think Austin Rivers, no surprise, he's leaning towards the sport he played, the athletes that he surrounded himself with, and seeing them up close. He hasn't been in an NFL locker room. He hasn't seen these athletes up close like that, like he would if he played in the NFL. So no surprise, no real hard feelings on how he fell on either side of this debate. But I just think how it all plays out, I think NFL players would find it easier to make that transition rather than NBA players moving over to the NFL. But let me know what you guys think on the points I made, where you fall in line with this debate. Is it easier for NBA players to play and make an impact in an NFL game, or is it easier for an NFL player to make the transition to the NBA and be more impactful on that side of the sport? Leave it in the comments and how you guys feel about that. I gave you guys my thoughts, and I'm sure people are still going to talk about it for the next couple of days. But with them doing that, that wraps it up for me on today's episode. I want to thank you guys for listening to today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Like always, please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and X for more of the network's content. If you want to see more of me and this show, go check out both YouTube channels, the GSMC Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel, where YouTube shorts are posted throughout the weekdays. You have the full live shows all recorded and posted on both channels, as well as individual segment videos. If you don't have enough time to watch an entire episode and just want to watch a specific segment, all those are on there on both channels as well. And as a reminder, tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more NFL and football conversations with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. Thanking you guys and signing off for right now. Hopefully I see you guys all back here again with me tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn ain't that